A single vote. That's all it took to change the course of royal history. In a room sealed from public eyes, Prince Edward, long seen as the quiet royal, emerged from the shadows and delivered a stunning blow. With one decisive act, he stripped Prince Andrew of his final lifeline, his state benefits. But this wasn't just a bureaucratic decision, it was a calculated strike born from years of frustration, secrets, and quiet rage. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What unfolded behind closed doors was not just the end of a chapter, it was the climax of a power struggle that had been simmering beneath the polished surface of the monarchy for decades. The internal vote, held in utmost secrecy and away from the prying eyes of press and public, was far from symbolic. It was final. Not a whisper of doubt echoed through the marble halls once Edward's verdict was delivered. This wasn't the deliberation of a family, it was the ruling of a regime protecting its crown at all costs. Prince Edward, often underestimated and routinely overshadowed, had finally found his moment and seized it with unshakable purpose. It shocked the palace staff who had long believed Edward would remain the peacekeeper. But peacekeepers break too, and Edward's patience had long been corroded by the slow unravelling of his brother's reputation. He didn't just vote, he led the charge. It was Edward who initiated the private council, Edward who laid down the dossier, and Edward who cast the deciding vote. That moment wasn't born out of spontaneity. It was the culmination of late-night strategy sessions, legal consultations, and sleepless nights wrestling with a truth the monarchy had refused to confront. The truth that Prince Andrew's presence, even stripped of titles, still carried the weight of scandal. Stripping Andrew of his remaining state benefits wasn't merely about financial implications, it was a message, a line drawn in royal sand. For decades, Andrew had walked it without consequence, but this was the final act of accountability. His security allowances, his travel budget, his access to ceremonial privileges, all severed in a single move. The symbolism couldn't be clearer. There was no path back. As the decision rippled through the royal corridors, an eerie silence descended. Staff avoided eye contact. Advisors exchanged uneasy glances. Whispers filled the vacuum where Andrew's defenders once stood. There were no tears, no confrontations, just a heavy, echoing understanding that something irreversible had happened. It wasn't just Andrew who had been exiled that day, it was the idea that scandal could be managed instead of eradicated. Insiders later revealed that both Camilla and William had quietly backed Edward's resolve, providing him the cover to act decisively. Their silence during the vote spoke louder than any words. This wasn't Edward standing alone, this was the inner circle closing ranks. Hours later, word began to trickle out through anonymous aides, setting off a media frenzy and a wave of public reactions ranging from disbelief to grim satisfaction. The monarchy, in one swift blow, had chosen preservation over blood ties. But this wasn't a spontaneous act. It was the final move in a cold, meticulous chess game that began long before the vote ever took place. While cameras showed smiles, the halls of Buckingham told a colder truth. For years, Edward and Andrew maintained a veneer of civility, but underneath, resentment brewed like poison. Family dinners became battlefields, and public ceremonies, silent standoffs. This wasn't just about royal duty. It was about legacy, betrayal, and buried truths finally clawing their way to the surface. From the moment the Falklands War catapulted Andrew into the spotlight as a supposed war hero, the narrative began to twist. Edward, the youngest and most reserved of the siblings, had quietly built a life defined by discretion and discipline. But while Edward sought stability, Andrew chased spectacle. And time and again, it was Edward's integrity that was drowned beneath the noise of his brother's controversies. Every headline that mentioned Andrew's indulgence or scandal cast a long shadow across Edward's commitment to duty, and it wasn't just the public who noticed. Within palace walls, the whispers became unavoidable. Edward's composure may have masked it, but a bitterness had begun to settle. Behind closed doors, the tension was no longer ignorable. At family gatherings, the atmosphere shifted the moment Andrew entered. Conversations paused, eyes glanced sideways, and Edward, once eager to keep peace, sat quietly, measuring each word. There were no outbursts, no overt confrontations, just a smouldering chill that grew colder with each passive dig or dismissive comment. Edward, once viewed as the soft-spoken brother, had grown tired of being eclipsed by a man whose recklessness embarrassed the very institution they had sworn to uphold. The deeper wound, however, wasn't just Andrew's actions, it was the family's silence in the face of them. Time after time, Andrew was shielded, protected. His misconduct explained away under the banner of tradition, or worse, ignored altogether. For Edward, who had given up personal ambition to serve the monarchy with quiet loyalty, this double standard was salt in a wound that never healed. What had once been brotherly tolerance mutated into a cold detachment. Edward no longer saw Andrew as a sibling, but as a threat to everything the crown still stood for. And then came the real shift when Queen Elizabeth passed, and a new order quietly began to take root. With Charles ascending to the throne and William stepping into greater prominence, the dynamics inside the firm began to shift. But it was Edward, the one often overlooked, who seized the moment of transformation. In the vacuum left by their mother's passing, he stepped forward not as the peacemaker, but as the quiet enforcer. With no official decree, no public fanfare, Edward began to consolidate respect within the ranks, earning the confidence of advisors, and more importantly, the silence of dissenters. It was clear now. Edward was done waiting. He had watched enough, tolerated too much, and sacrificed more than anyone ever acknowledged. The Cold War between the brothers was no longer sustainable. Something had to give, and Edward was ready to be the one to deliver it. And yet, what triggered Edward to act now? The answer lies in a secret dossier, one that was never meant to be seen. In a sealed red folder, marked Private Senior Eyes Only, lay the evidence that changed everything. A dossier reportedly compiled under King Charles's quiet instruction and passed through only a select few. When Edward opened it, he didn't just read about Andrew's past. He uncovered a pattern of recklessness that posed a danger to the monarchy itself. The arrival of the folder was as calculated as its contents, placed discreetly on Edward's desk with no sender's name, no covering note, only the quiet implication that what lay inside could no longer be ignored. Whispers quickly followed about who had leaked it from the inner sanctum, and every rumor pointed inward, toward someone trusted enough to move unseen through the palace's most guarded corridors. The pages themselves were devastating in their restraint. Private financial requests, masked as official needs, intercepted communications hinting at troubling associations, and a web of quiet favors called in at moments when scrutiny was highest. It wasn't one revelation that broke Edward. It was the accumulation, the undeniable pattern of entitlement that had grown bolder with every year of protection. As he read, disbelief turned to anger, and anger hardened into resolve. This was no youthful mistake, no lapse in judgment. It was a sustained disregard for the very institution that had shielded Andrew time and time again. Edward's fury was not loud, not theatrical, but cold and surgical. He closed the folder, walked straight into the quiet confidence of those who still believed Andrew could be managed, and laid the truth bare without mercy. One by one, the senior royals were confronted with facts they could no longer rationalize away, and for the first time, the whispers were replaced by silence. The dossier became the instrument that shifted reluctance into action. What had once been uncomfortable suspicion transformed into undeniable consensus. Yet even as momentum built, a bitter divide opened within the family over what should be done next. Some argued for full transparency to release everything, endure the storm, and prove to the world that the monarchy was capable of cleansing itself. Others warned that exposure would detonate more than just one reputation, that it would fracture the crown beyond repair. The debate raged behind locked doors, not as a clash of ethics, but as a struggle between survival and redemption. Edward listened to both sides, but he had already crossed the point of hesitation. For him, the answer was not about public spectacle. It was about ending a cycle of consequence-free betrayal. Then, just days after the decisive vote was quietly secured, the unthinkable happened. The original dossier vanished, not misplaced, Not archived, removed. No trace in the records. No digital backup in the vaults that were meant to be infallible. Its disappearance sent a fresh tremor of unease through those who had seen it, raising a question no one dared to ask aloud. If the truth itself could be erased, who still had the power to protect Andrew even now? The absence of the folder did not undo what it had already ignited, but it left behind the chilling sense that someone, somewhere, had tried to rewrite the moment before it became irreversible. But long before the dossier surfaced, Andrew had made one final attempt to claw his way back into royal grace, and it backfired spectacularly. Cornered and increasingly isolated, Prince Andrew wasn't ready to fade into irrelevance. In a last-ditch gamble, he pushed for a return to royal duty under the guise of charity and national unity. What he didn't expect: the fierce backlash from within his own bloodline. His own brother, his own allies, all turning their backs in one thunderous rejection. It began quietly subtle appearances at local charity events, brief speeches, and orchestrated photo opportunities that painted Andrew as a man changed, a prince humbled by exile. There were whispers of a rehabilitation campaign being shaped behind palace walls, led by longtime loyalists who believed the public's attention had moved on. At the heart of the plan was an appeal to King Charles himself, to allow Andrew a gradual re-entry into public life, not as a senior royal, but as a symbolic figure of service and national healing. A desperate attempt to mask scandal in the language of goodwill. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was said to have drawn a firm line. Behind closed doors, she reportedly refused any involvement in public engagements that featured Andrew, citing not just optics, but principle. Her influence, increasingly potent within the firm, sent a ripple through the palace hierarchy. And then there was Queen Camilla. Her response wasn't verbal, it was icy silence. The same kind of silence that kills an idea before it can find breath. Every time Andrew's name came up in discussion, Camilla would simply raise her eyes and move the conversation forward. No endorsement, no defense, just deliberate indifference. And in the middle of this silent rebellion stood Edward, watching, calculating, waiting. When Andrew's camp made its formal request to the king, Edward was the first to object, not with emotion, but with cold precision. He laid out the risks, the consequences, the message it would send to the public. His voice carried the weight of finality. There would be no second chances. Not now. Not after everything that had already been exposed. He reminded the family that rehabilitation without accountability was nothing more than a PR trick, and the monarchy couldn't afford another illusion. What began as a quiet return exploded into a definitive rejection. The campaign collapsed within days. Media outlets, tipped off by palace insiders, ran headlines about Andrew testing the waters. But behind those carefully worded reports was a battlefield of broken allegiances. Edward had drawn the line publicly, and in doing so, signalled to the rest of the institution that enough was enough. There would be no soft re-entry, no revisionist narrative. Andrew had crossed too many lines, and this attempt at a comeback only solidified why he could never return. But Edward wasn't acting alone. He was channeling the quiet fury of an institution desperate to survive. And the crown was no longer silent. Unknown to the public, a hidden circle had been quietly reshaping the monarchy from the inside. The Windsor Reform Council, a name whispered by insiders, met in secrecy to draft the future of the crown. And on the top of every agenda? What to do about Prince Andrew. When Edward cast his vote, it was the council's hand guiding his. Born from necessity in the days following Queen Elizabeth's funeral, the council began not as a formal institution but as a crisis response. Team private meetings attended by only the most trusted. Its earliest members were hand-picked: Prince Edward, Prince William, Queen Camilla, and two of the monarchy's most discreet legal minds. Their mission was clear: restore the royal family's credibility, redefine its role in a modern Britain, and eliminate internal threats that could reignite public outrage. With the Queen gone, the comforting illusion of unshakable unity had vanished. What remained was a power structure forced to confront its cracks, and Andrew was the deepest among them. The group met weekly, often in the lesser-known wings of royal estates, far from cameras and ceremonial chatter. Agendas were tight, discussions were sharp, and every name brought up was measured against one brutal question. Do they serve the crown or threaten it? Prince Andrew, according to leaked notes from these private sessions, was consistently ranked as non-essential. Not merely sidelined, but actively flagged as a reputational risk with no strategic value. His scandals had drained public goodwill. And despite his quiet attempts at reintegration, there was zero confidence in any scenario where Andrew's return would benefit the institution. But even within the council, opinions varied on how to act. William pushed for structural clarity roles, responsibilities, a streamlined royal corps. Camilla championed quiet exclusion, preferring to freeze Andrew out with silence rather than provoke unnecessary backlash. Yet it was Edward who emerged as the executor, the one member willing to get his hands dirty. His moral clarity, once dismissed as harmless formality, became the council's sharpest weapon. Edward didn't seek power for prestige, he sought it to clean house. When the council agreed that action was needed, it was Edward they looked to, not to speak, but to strike. And so, the groundwork was laid. Budgets reviewed, roles audited, and legal frameworks drafted. Edward became the face of enforcement. But behind him stood the weight of collective decision-making. The council did not leave fingerprints, they left direction. And when Edward finally stood before his brother with the verdict in hand, it wasn't a personal vendetta, it was institutional execution. He was simply the one chosen to do what no one else would publicly admit needed to be done. But while the palace plotted in whispers, Andrew had one last card to play, one that would drag the family's fractures into the daylight. No one expected the letter to leak. Handwritten, emotionally raw, and filled with accusations, Andrew's private appeal to the king was never meant for the public. But within hours, it was all over the tabloids, igniting a firestorm of public outrage, family shame, and an explosive confrontation with Edward that no one could contain. The letter was desperate, its tone swinging wildly between sorrow and defiance. In it, Andrew pleaded with his older brother, King Charles, to halt what he called a campaign of institutional exile. He wrote of betrayal, of being cast aside like a disgraced servant rather than a son of the sovereign. But woven through the self-pity were pointed jabs, accusations that Edward had manipulated the vote, that Camilla had silently cheered it on, and that the palace was allowing vindictive forces to dismantle the monarchy from within. The final lines were the most damning. History will not forgive the silence of those who could have spoken in my defense. A message, no doubt, aimed directly at Charles. But what truly shocked the royals wasn't the letter itself, it was how it ended up on the front pages of every major British outlet less than 48 hours after it was written. Theories exploded. Some said the leak came from a junior aide sympathetic to Andrew, hoping to sway public opinion. Others pointed fingers at Andrew himself, suggesting he orchestrated the release as a final gamble, forcing the monarchy into a corner by dragging its private shame into the spotlight. Either way, the damage was instant and irreversible. The press devoured every word. Public backlash was immediate. Headlines called it a royal civil war. Commentators debated the future of the monarchy with unprecedented intensity. But behind palace walls, the fury was quieter and far more dangerous. Edward, already carrying the weight of the vote, was now thrust into the center of a media storm. Calls came in from advisors urging him to issue a statement, to defend his integrity, to clarify his role in the affair. But Edward refused to play the press game. He chose action over optics. Instead of a prepared comment, he requested a private meeting with Andrew, one final reckoning. At Royal Lodge, where Andrew had retreated in disgrace, the brothers came face to face without aides, without intermediaries. What passed between them wasn't negotiation. It was finality. Witnesses say the tension was suffocating. Andrew, flushed with frustration, demanded to know why Edward had turned the family against him. Edward's reply was measured but unforgiving. "You had every chance," he said. locking eyes with the brother he no longer trusted. "Now, you have none." That single sentence, delivered without theatrics, marked the moment the door closed, not just on Andrew's role, but on any illusion that blood would override consequence. And just when it seemed the storm couldn't grow darker, a single financial audit revealed something even more damning. Quiet audits don't make headlines until they do. A recent review of state expenditures linked to Prince Andrew uncovered years of questionable reimbursements, excessive security charges, and lavish personal luxuries billed as official business. For Edward, this wasn't just a scandal, it was the final nail in the coffin. It began as a routine audit, a quiet, bureaucratic check initiated by royal financial advisors in response to mounting public pressure around the monarchy's use of public funds. But buried within the numbers were patterns that pointed to something far more unsettling. Dozens of transactions on paper, innocuous, suddenly raised red flags when cross-referenced against Andrew's personal engagements. Private retreats in the Alps, absurdly priced accommodations on official trips, and multi-thousand-pound security upgrades that protected no one but Andrew's private guests. A lifestyle masked as duty, a fortune disguised as necessity. The line between personal indulgence and public responsibility had been so thoroughly blurred, it took forensic accountants weeks to disentangle the two. The findings were quietly delivered to the inner circle. Treasury advisors urged discretion, but could not hide their alarm. Watchdogs outside the palace caught wind of discrepancies, and pressure began to build. Questions were whispered in Parliament, and media outlets hinted at financial irregularities they couldn't yet confirm. But inside the palace, confirmation had already come. Edward sat with the audit in front of him. And this time, there was no rage, only stillness. The numbers didn't lie. Andrew had, yet again, taken from an institution he claimed to defend. This wasn't a scandal waiting to happen, it was one that had already cost them more than they dared admit publicly. William, briefed privately, reportedly said what many in the room already felt: "Cut the losses." It was a brutal phrase, one devoid of sentiment. And yet it carried the cold, strategic tone the moment demanded. Edward knew what had to happen. There would be no more deliberation, no more appeasement, no more internal warnings. He summoned the Reform Council, laid out the audit findings, and moved the conversation directly to action. His words were simple but unshakable. And so it did. Behind tightly sealed doors, with eyes cast down and hearts weighed heavy, the final decision was made. Prince Andrew's remaining state benefits, his last official ties to the public purse, were revoked with immediate effect. It wasn't just an administrative act, it was a reckoning. A signal that even the monarchy's most protected could fall. Edward, once overlooked, now stood as the iron force of a new era. And while the press speculated and the public reacted, the palace braced for the fallout. And so the vote was cast, but the palace never anticipated how far-reaching the consequences would be. In the wake of Edward's stunning decision, the royal household is more fractured than ever. Andrew remains defiant, retreating further into isolation. Charles is silent, William distracted, and Edward transformed. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a reckoning. And it may have broken something inside the House of Windsor forever. Stripped of his last remaining state privileges, Andrew withdrew into the cold comfort of Royal Lodge, a residence that now felt more like an exile than a home. He stopped attending even private gatherings, refused to answer calls from royal aides, and shut out the few relatives who dared to visit. To the public, he had disappeared. But to those within the palace, his absence loomed larger than ever, an uncomfortable reminder of a family that had once hidden scandal beneath ceremony, only to watch it explode from within. Yet it wasn't just Andrew who felt the rupture. Behind palace doors, a new tension had begun to simmer this time between Edward and Princess Eugenie. Once close, their relationship fractured under the weight of what some described as betrayal. Eugenie, fiercely loyal to her father, struggled to hide her resentment. She believed Andrew had already paid the price, that the family's silence had become cruelty. Edward, unmoved by sentiment, stood firm. For him, Justice wasn't personal, it was necessary. Their exchanges grew colder, fewer, until even family functions bore the awkwardness of quiet glances and unspoken pain. King Charles, meanwhile, found himself paralyzed between duty and blood. As monarch, he was expected to uphold the decision, but as a brother, he was haunted by the silence he had kept for too long. Those closest to him say he aged faster in those weeks, that the burden of inaction had finally found its weight. He issued no statements, gave no subtle nods. He watched as Edward became the enforcer he himself could never be, and carried the guilt quietly, behind palace walls that were once filled with certainty. In public, Prince William was praised for his neutrality, but insiders told a different story. He wasn't distant, he was deliberate. He had been present at nearly every private discussion, his voice guiding the council more than anyone realized. While the world saw a future king maintaining composure, the palace saw a strategist pulling strings in silence, ensuring Edward had the room to act while he preserved his own image for the throne. It was a masterclass in optics and a reminder that loyalty, in royal bloodlines, is often a matter of calculation. And yet, for all the fractures and grief, something remarkable happened. The public rallied not in defense of Andrew, but in quiet applause for Edward. The quietest royal had become the boldest. Polls showed a spike in support for a leaner, more accountable monarchy. Edward, long forgotten in the shadows of his brothers, now stood as a figure of strength. But the cost was undeniable. The House of Windsor emerged leaner, colder, more surgical. And in that transformation, something intangible was lost: the illusion of invincibility, the safety of tradition, the warmth of unity. But in royal tradition, endings are never true endings. They're preludes to the next storm, and a new player is already stepping into the shadows. As the royal order reshuffles, one name quietly rises: Lady Louise Windsor. Once the shy teenager far from the limelight, she now stands poised for something greater. Whispers from within suggest Edward is grooming her, not just as a modern face of the monarchy, but as his personal legacy to overwrite Andrew's shame. Her presence at recent royal engagements has not gone unnoticed. Gone are the carefully controlled appearances of a royal child kept at arm's length from scrutiny. In their place stands a poised, composed young woman, still understated, but now unmistakably part of the fold. Royal watchers began noting subtle changes: more frequent outings beside her parents, increased visibility at charitable events, and, most tellingly, moments where she was seen speaking not behind, but ahead of her mother, the Countess of Wessex. It wasn't just a change in protocol, it was a change in positioning. Behind the scenes, Edward and Sophie have become more deliberate in how Louise is introduced to public life. Their joint appearances have grown more strategic. Louise now attends events with senior royals, steps into ceremonial roles once reserved for the more prominent Windsors, and carries herself with a calmness that contrasts starkly with the chaos recently endured by the family. While the palace hasn't made any official declarations, insiders confirm what the public suspects. Louise is being readied not for glamour, but for responsibility. Media outlets have begun speculating about her future patronages, hinting that she may be lined up to take on roles that require both trust and discretion. Two qualities the monarchy now desperately needs. In editorials and social commentary, she's referred to as the safe royal, the one untouched by scandal, untarnished by past privilege. And while the firm has never explicitly confirmed a succession of influence, every move suggests that Edward sees in his daughter not just a symbolic future, but a redemptive one. The emotion behind this rise cannot be ignored. Edward, having sacrificed personal comfort to deliver a devastating blow to his brother, now looks to Louise not as a substitute, but as a correction. Where Andrew stumbled, Louise will walk steadily. Where Andrew craved indulgence, Louise will serve with restraint. In private, Edward is reported to have told a close confidant, "She'll do what he never could earn respect." And those words linger, not just as a comparison, but as a declaration. Louise isn't rising by chance, she's rising by design. In the grand arc of royal history, this is how legacies pivot. Quietly, strategically, through the careful elevation of a name once overlooked. The House of Windsor has always known how to survive not by denying the past, but by repackaging it. Andrew's chapter has closed, sealed by scandal and silence. But from its ashes, another story begins, one written not with defiance, but with dignity. Louise Windsor may never hold the throne, but she may yet carry the crown's credibility forward. And so, the curtain falls on Andrew's final privileges, while a new legacy quietly begins to rise from the ashes. In the House of Windsor, nothing is ever lost. It's simply rewritten. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.